I wanted to start off my video by saying I finally got the two books I was waiting for. This is not all of the books I was waiting for, but some of them. This is The Life Extension Companion by Dirk Pearson and Sandy Shaw, which gives the exact breakdown of specific nutrients needed to treat certain diseases. And this is Old Age, Its Cause and Prevention by Sanford Bennett. I already did a previous book of his called Exercising in Bed. This is basically an updated and more comprehensive version of that same book, and I'll be doing a review of that. But the reason I wanted to make this video is that many people, unfortunately, whether they're on the Trump side or if they're just not very bright, seem to think that the whole situation, it's easier to blame everything on Xi Jinping and China. And it is very easy, and I blame China for a couple things, like for example the backward culture in China that allowed the eating of animals, certain animals, that caused the coronavirus outbreak. However, China took care of that in a way by outlawing the eating of wild game. Okay, now what you need to understand is this. The local corruption is the reason that China has trouble enforcing the things that it passes because of the sheer mass of its population. This is also why China did not come right out and say, by the way, everybody in China, we have a crazy pandemic, because they were trying to avoid the sheer panic that would have caused people to panic and leave Wuhan and other areas and spread that disease everywhere. Now, I don't know that for a fact. I don't work for the Chinese government, but I'm just saying that's what makes sense. What I will also say is China did tell the governments of the world about these things, and the way that the governments of the world reacted were not what you might expect. For example, in Italy, the mayor of Florence encouraged his citizens to go around and hug a Chinese person, because obviously that's the most logical reaction to the fact that people are coming from a country that's carrying a disease. Why don't we go hug the people that are potentially infected with this disease? And the United States was no better in a sense, because anti-racism spread this thing. One of the biggest problems, as you'll see in an interview I do with, well, not I do, an interview in the description with Dr. Fauci before Congress, where he states, you need to avoid all groups. He didn't say that you need to ban protesting, because you can't ban protesting, but how many times did you hear so many people say, oh, these protests need to continue, racism is a pandemic, just like the actual pandemic? Not really, though. And I want to make a point. I know a number of people, of course, that are African American and Hispanic, okay? The one Hispanic woman that I know, she has family dying of COVID-19. She lost one member of her family to COVID-19. She's losing another member of her family to COVID-19 as we speak. And I have not a friend, but I know a woman that's African American. She's lost numerous family members to illegal gun violence, not gun violence, illegal gun violence that was, caused by drug culture, okay? So what I'm saying is, what's really killing minorities? Is it racism, or is it COVID-19 and certain cultural things that are exasperating certain issues in their communities, okay? And what I'd like to point out, like when people say, well, it's gun violence, we need to control access to guns. When there's gun violence in the inner city, I live in a part of Pennsylvania that's not too far from Lancaster and right smack dab where Philadelphia is, okay? When there's gun violence in Philadelphia, it's not because all the hunters in western and central Pennsylvania and all of the folks from the suburbs that have, a gun for home protection or what have you, it's not because they're all going to the city and shooting people, okay? It's because of the illegal guns that are owned by the individuals in the city. Okay, that's what's causing this. So to put, quote, racism on an equal par with the pandemic in the middle of a pandemic is even stupider than go hug a Chinese person, which was what Florence, Italy put in place. Now, I want to be very clear. I don't have any problem with people. I don't have any problem with Chinese people. That's not what I'm pointing out here. What I'm pointing out is there is a time and a place for everything. When you can restrict somebody's First Amendment rights, rightly so, when you can rightly restrict somebody's First Amendment rights to go to church, to keep them from becoming a danger to the public by spreading a pandemic, it makes sense to me that you could also curtail their same First Amendment right to protest when the public health is at risk. And the reason I called this video In Defense of Xi Jinping is because you have, who was more irresponsible here? Now, I'm not saying that China is without flaw. I don't like China. I think it's an authoritarian dictatorship. I think that the way they treat the Chinese people is wrong. I think the way that what's going on with Hong Kong is bad. I'm not for China. I actually consider China to be an enemy of the United States. Not a hot enemy, not an enemy we're at war with, but an enemy that we could unfortunately very easily be at war with at any minute. And it's absurd to me that we keep pouring money and resources into a country that is basically an avowed enemy of the United States. I'm not by any means saying that China is a good country or what have you. What I'm saying is the exasperation of the COVID-19 crisis in the United States is not the fault of the Chinese government. It is the fault of the Trump administration, okay? And it will be the fault of the Biden administration if they don't take certain actions to curtail this, which they say they will, but let's see it happen before we, celebrate. You know what I mean? My point is that all these people that find it so much easier to blame China and not to take responsibility for their own actions, if you look at the travel, we have well over 330,000 deaths due to COVID-19. As per the CDC's numbers the last time I checked, which was right before this video. So my point is the responsibility falls on individuals to not be morons. And if you look at the traveling through Thanksgiving, through Christmas, and whatever the hell's going to happen tonight on New Year's, you're going to see an explosion of cases. And the other thing is the government talks very much about these vaccines that, honestly, and I'm not downplaying the importance of vaccines, I think that the way that these vaccines were produced leads a lot to question, and I don't think the government is being straightforward enough and honest enough about both the limitations and the validity of these vaccines. Okay, you also don't hear them, now they pushed a vaccine. You don't hear them talking about the Eastern Virginia Medical School protocol for controlling and preventing COVID-19 to treat it at home. You don't hear any of that, even though there's research backing it. You just hear them pushing this vaccine. Oh, when the vaccine comes, it'll all be fine. But yet what they're not telling you is the vaccine doesn't necessarily stop the spread of the virus. It may reduce symptoms, and I want to be clear, I'm not a doctor. I'm just repeating what I found out through researching through the news agencies and through the CDC and through PubMed.gov and through usual routes of research that any normal person would do. So don't take what I'm saying as medical advice. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a nurse. I'm not in any way somebody that can give you medical advice. Don't take my advice. Just listen to what I'm saying and don't do it. I'm not a competent or licensed person to give medical advice. But what I'm saying is that these people that run our government are not being candid with the fact that there are other means of helping to treat this virus. And I'm going to leave a link to Dr. Bregan, who has an interview with a gentleman that discusses what this protocol is. Again, I'm not a medical doctor, although Dr. Bregan and the gentleman that is talking about it are medical doctors, but we'll push that aside for the second. My point is that you have, and I'll bring this up. Back in March, was it March? Yeah, March. Back in March, when I contacted the Argentine embassy in Washington, D.C., or the Argentine consulate in Washington, D.C., and I asked about how this would affect my travel. They were very candid, honest, and open with me. They explained to me, yeah, I can't go to Argentina unless I can quarantine myself. If I can't quarantine myself, I will be quarantined. And they encouraged me to keep in contact with them. Now, mind you, I'm a foreigner. I'm not an Argentinian citizen by any stretch of the imagination. But what my point is here is look at the way that Argentina has dealt with the pandemic, which Argentina is more or less a third world country. But look at how successfully they've dealt with the pandemic versus how the United States has. And also look at how honest, this is back in March, they were very open and honest with me about how this would affect my traveling. They wanted to make sure, this is what's funny, they wanted to make sure I, a foreigner, was safe and that I understood how it could affect my safety if I went to Argentina, or even if I was quarantining, blah, blah, blah. If I had property in Argentina, which I don't, I would have been perfectly allowed to go to Argentina and stay quarantined. So my point is there has been marked dishonesty in the U.S. government. Who remembers the Surgeon General not coming forth with whether we should wear masks or shouldn't wear masks? Now, I don't think that this was purposeful. I think that these people just did not have their stories straight because they did not bother to have their stories straight first. Mind you, Trump disbanded the pandemic response team, which was put in place by George W. Bush. Okay? Because of that, this pandemic has been handled very sloppily. Okay? So my point is to push everything off, oh, it's China's fault. This didn't really have to happen to the extent that it has happened if Trump would have kept in place the things that President Bush put in place and that President Obama expanded. What's interesting is, you'll notice, Donald Trump has stated on a number of occasions who could have foreseen a pandemic. Well, clearly, both President George W. Bush and President Obama foresaw a pandemic. Enough that President Bush put a pandemic response team together and President Obama expanded that team. And it's funny because, again, one of the reasons I voted for Trump was he was, I thought, honest. He's not. He's probably the most corrupt president we've ever had. But the thing is, who remembers when he told Jeb Bush, when Jeb Bush goes, say what you want about my brother, he kept us safe. And then Donald Trump said, really, Jeb? Really? And he pointed out 9/11 happened on George W. Bush's watch. And that's true. And I do not forgive George W. Bush, the Republican Party. I don't forgive any of these people for the laziness that caused 9/11 to happen and the over 1,000 people that died on 9/11. And also the thousands of people that have died in these idiotic regime change wars that have been pushed by 9/11. Okay, so let's be straight. That's the truth. Donald Trump was telling the truth. George W. Bush did not keep us safe. 9/11 happened on his watch. We had these regime change wars because of 9/11. But if you look at the death toll from COVID-19, it's basically a 9/11 happening every freaking day. So who is a worse president? It's not George W. And actually, there's a lot of things about George W. Bush. If I ever have the time, I'll make a video. There are a lot of good things that George W. Bush did for this economy, to help the economy, to help the poor, to help the disenfranchised. There were a lot of things that Bush did that were really good things that will never be taken to the forefront because of the Iraq War, because of the Afghanistan War, because of these things, because of 9/11. But George W. Bush was probably our last insane president. The previous president, President Obama, and the current president, President Trump, seem to seethe with narcissistic grandiosity. And it's not boding well for this republic. And I'm going to leave links in the description to show that what I'm saying is true.